We'd like to welcome you tonight. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to come and be here. And we have a really wonderful program in store for you for this evening. So Your Grace, Reverend Fathers, distinguished guests, and dear friends, good evening. Welcome. We're glad you're here. Our time here tonight parallels an important conversation taking place at the United Nations. This week, the Commission for Social Development is tasked with passing a resolution on the priority theme of affordable housing and social protection floors for all to address homelessness. The Archdiocese is actively advocating at the Commission for a universally accepted definition of homelessness to allow for clear measurement of global homelessness to inform the efforts of all nations. This Friday, two of our panelists, Dr. Tsemberis and James Carras, right here in the middle, will be speaking at the UN on homelessness. We believe that the advocacy work we do at the international level must be bridged with how we serve as church on the ground. This is why we are here tonight. We will begin the evening with a wonderful panel of speakers, followed by an opportunity for questions and answers. After Q&A, each organization participating in the Service Opportunity Fair will, in just 1 minute, in a lightning round, share their mission. Afterwards, you will have an opportunity to walk around the room and learn more about each organization and the different volunteer opportunities they offer. So all the organizations are in the periphery of the room, and we're really glad that they can be here tonight to join us. I would now like to welcome His Grace Bishop Apostolos of Media to come give opening remarks. His Grace serves as the Chief Secretary of Holy Eparchial Synod of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. Thank you, Your Grace, for being with us this evening.
My beloved brothers and concelebrants clergy, distinguished guests, Madam President of the National Philoptochos, Mrs. Maria Logus, Mr. Carras, Dr. Tsemberis, welcome to the New York. And dear brothers and sisters in Christ, His Eminence Archbishop Apostolos is traveling to California these days, and he asked me very kindly to be with you tonight. And on behalf of His Eminence, I would like to welcome you to this crucial event on addressing the crisis of homelessness and ways the Orthodox Christian community can respond. Allow me to begin by thanking the organizers, the speakers, the organizations participating, and all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. We gather here tonight because we want to understand and respond to something we see in our community. How it is possible that we live in a nation of immense wealth, and yet people are hungry, people are unclothed, and people do not have a safe place to call home. In the Gospel of Matthew 25:35, chapter 4, Christ proclaims, "For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to see me. Truly I say to you, as you did not one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me." Each person is made in the image and the likeness of God. As Orthodox Christians, we are called to serve our fellow human beings in a rational way that recognize each individual's humanity, value, and dignity. In Greek, the words estia and nikos describe the home, a place where the heart is, a warm place there where family gathers, and an altar of family values and history. We are instinctually connected to the safety and the sacredness of our homes offer. It is difficult to imagine not having a place to call home, and yet we will experience homelessness. Our hearts constantly search for something the world cannot provide. Our hearts long for Christ and the eternal life he offers in the kingdom of heaven. By serving our neighbors, people around us who are hungry, who need clothes, who are sick, and who are homeless, we serve Christ. And in so serving, we realize our own homelessness and distance from God as a kind of exile. We are challenged to seek him by seeing Christ in the face of those around us. His All Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew once wrote, "Politicians and professors alone cannot solve the problems of Western society. Pornography, pollution, drug addiction, misery, crime, wars, and so many homeless people. Religious leaders have a central role to play in providing inspiration. This is why in September 2019, the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America, through the Department of the Inter-Orthodox Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations, called a meeting of Orthodox Christian ministries who serve those experiencing homelessness to meet and create a common understanding of homelessness from the Orthodox Christian perspectives. The meeting concluded with a multifaceted understanding of homelessness and formed a network of a pan-Orthodox humanitarian organizations for better collaboration. Additionally, an Orthodox volunteer corps was envisioned, which will offer Orthodox Christian young adults a year-long opportunity of service and transformation. These new initiatives on homelessness challenge each of us to look internally at our own hearts while also serving our neighbors who may be vulnerable and homelessness or have lost their homes. We as members of the body of Christ and his church are called to serve. Tonight we will learn about homelessness and ways to share our talent and time in service to our neighbors. I pray that each of us face our own spiritual homelessness as we embark on this journey in Christ. God bless you and thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Your Grace, for reminding us that each of us are homeless as our hearts search for and seek Christ. I would now like to introduce Dr. Sam Tsemberis. Dr. Sam is a Greek-Canadian-American clinical psychologist who originated the Housing First program, based on the belief that housing is a basic human right. He serves as the CEO of the Pathways Housing First Institute, Executive Director of the VA UCLA Center of Excellence for Training and Research on Veteran Homelessness, and is on the faculty in the Department of Psychiatry at Columbia University Medical Center. Housing First is based on the program he launched in 1992 and is an evidence-based program that effectively ends homelessness and improves housing stability and quality of life for individuals with mental illness, addiction, and health problems. Dr. Tsemberis had supported the dissemination of the program across the U.S., Canada, in the European Union, Australia, New Zealand, and now Housing First is a cornerstone of their homeless policy. Please help me enjoy welcoming Dr. Sam to the podium.
Hi, thank you, Spyridoula. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here. I was here quite some time ago at the christening of my godson, so it's a kind of a return home and after quite some time. Thank you, Your Eminence, for your comments and reminding us that we are all of us, more the same than different. And I want to congratulate the initiation of the youth initiative to provide service in whatever way they can to people who are homeless, because I think the connection is what is the implementation of that spiritual goal. So I have about 10 minutes, and I have about 30 years of experience, and so, but I'm trusting that Spyridoula will keep me on time. I thought that what I was going to, I organized my presentation to tell you a little bit about sort of the business of homelessness, you know, because it is, there is a homelessness industry, and I want to tell you about how it's thought about at a policy level and at a county level and how programs are designed. And then I'm going to tell you about what we did to start this Housing First program, which is different than business as usual, and a little bit about lessons learned along the way. So in the United States, which really started homelessness, we count homeless people. We've been counting them for about 20 years now. It's called the One Night Count, and it's sponsored by HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Organization, the federal agency responsible for homelessness pretty much. We count homeless people on the third Thursday of January between midnight and 7 a.m. Do we really want to know how many homeless people there are? And it's not unusual for government to want to underestimate the number of homeless people because of the investment in then social services and housing that they would have to make proportionate to the size of the problem. So when you talk to the government, New York City, or the federal government at HUD, you'll get a small number. When you talk to the Coalition for the Homeless, or you talk to advocacy groups that spend time with homeless people, that number is doubled or tripled. And so the numbers is up for grabs depending on who you're asking and what their investment is. These numbers that I'm showing you are the numbers from the One Night Count, and they pretty much drive the investment in homeless programs for the country. We've been averaging about 550,000 homeless people on that One Night Count. Half of them are families, and by families I mean mostly single-parent women with 1 or 2 children, somewhere between the ages of 35 and 45, and the kids are anywhere between 6 and 12. And families we don't see because they're in the shelters, but they're counted in that count. Sheltered counts, and then the unsheltered, which are people living on the streets. We have about the same number of homeless people in New York City as we do in Los Angeles, about 60,000. But in Los Angeles, they're visible and intense and on the sidewalks, and because they don't have the shelter system or the weather that we have here. But it doesn't mean that we're doing any better than Los Angeles. How did all this start? Now, for those of you that are like, 35 and younger, homelessness has always been part of the landscape. So we think homelessness, of course, it's sort of like Second Avenue. You know, it's homeless, First Avenue. It's just. But for those of us that were of age in 1980, homelessness started in 1980 in this country, and then in other countries about 10 years later. And it started, and if you sort of have seen any of the biographies of the Ronald Reagan era, it started in the Reagan era. And what happened during Reagan's supply-side economics and breaks for corporate America and reduced taxation, where in this administration corporations are paying zero in taxes, and so are billionaires, which then creates a huge deficit in the national coffers, and where administrations of conservative fiscal orientation take the money to make up that deficit is from social services. So Reagan, I have 5 minutes? Okay, I'm going to skip a lot of these slides, all right? No, don't worry. I'm going too slow for the time frame I'm on. But I want to say that what happened, this slide shows you what happened during the Reagan administration when they cut HUD funding from, there were 350,000 units of housing that were being built in this country, right up, from the Second World War almost continuously, public housing. And you may not agree with public housing, but it was affordable housing for people who were poor. That number dropped to 50, where it has remained all of this time. This graph starts, if you can't see the numbers on the left-hand side, the cliff drops 1980. Reagan came in. It was heading that way a little bit, but they took it to scale, but it never went back, not through Clinton, not through Obama. It's American. It's not Democratic or Republican. This is capitalism, essentially. And what has happened here is there's been a simultaneous increase in the affordable, in the housing market, in the real estate market, a boom, so that anyone invested in real estate is making a lot of money, wages are staying flat, real estate is going up, and what we have structurally in place is a homelessness generating society. We're creating more homeless people every year than we're able to get out through all of these very fine programs. So the first thing I want as a takeaway of who are the homeless, it's a fluid number. Homelessness is a stream. It's not a pool of people that, if we just get everybody out, then we'll have ended homelessness. Yes, you will have ended homelessness for that year, but next year there's more people coming. So you have to think prevention or address the structural problems that are creating this. The people that are most vulnerable to this are people who are on fixed income or disability income because their incomes are not keeping up with the cost of living, and so they end up homeless. This is a graph that shows you the increase in the New York City shelter population during the same period. You could see it goes almost inversely in the opposite direction. Housing goes down, the number of homeless people and the shift to shelter goes up. And this is not, by the way, unique. 10 years after it started here, this kind of privatization and moving towards away from support of social programs, when it shifted and it's permeated Canada, Europe, with the free trade and the kind of global economy, those kinds of values of the monetization. Homelessness is different than addiction and mental illness. If you have resources and support, mental illness and addiction, which has been around for thousands of years, and we still figure out how to deal with it, but doesn't necessarily create homelessness. It's the intersection of the fact that people who are on disability and are poor and have no resources become homeless. We have misinterpreted that to think that it's their clinical problems that made them homeless, or lack of character. They're lazy, not lack of cash. So the system works pretty well. People go to shelter, and a lot of people have benefited from the system. It's not a total failure, otherwise we would have probably done away with it a long time ago, but it doesn't work very well, and it certainly does not work well for a group of people that we continue to see on the streets every day that go in and out of shelter and jail and hospital. That group that we see on the street is only about 15% of the homeless. The rest we don't see. People we see are 15% of the homeless, and yet we've created an entire industry based on that 15%. And so it's a little misdirected, but that's where public perception is, and that's what drives public policy. That's the group that we focused on for the Housing First approach, because that group was not doing well by trying to get sober or trying to go into treatment and then housing. Housing in the homeless industrial business is something that has to be earned through a demonstration of participation in treatment. It's very hard to be in treatment and stay focused on treatment when you're thinking about survival. So what did we do? We decided that the way that we were going about it over and over again, insisting that people get sober before they get housed, wasn't working, and we gave up our beliefs and assumptions and took a new approach. And the approach we took basically was to admit that we didn't know what we were doing, and that what we were doing wasn't working, and doing it over and over again, as you all know, is a definition of insanity when we're expecting different results by trying the same thing. And we trained ourselves through this psych rehab approach to turn over the decision-making to the client. We thought, who better to ask than the person who's suffering in this condition, and what would they think is the best way out? It was remarkable, the clarity and the consistency of the message. Isn't it obvious? I just need a place to live, a simple, decent place to live like I had before I was on the street. The problem was that we couldn't get anyone into the kind of housing, permanent supportive housing or other housing programs, because the housing being built for people who were homeless, mentally ill, and addicted required that you show up and have no symptoms of being mentally ill or addicted. You had to be clean and sober for 16 months or 18 months, and you had to be participating in treatment. So we created a program called Housing First with a grant from the State Office of Mental Health, and we took people right from the streets into a place of their own. We rented apartments, starting with Hell's Kitchen and then Harlem and the South Bronx, because the market kept changing. And we just invited people to, we're going to do it their way. You don't want to go to treatment? It's okay. And we would bring people into the house and we would visit them. They had two requirements in the program. You have to sign the lease and be a good tenant like everyone else. It's not, you can't violate the lease, you'd be evicted. And you had to agree that we would visit you. We were putting people in very frail, vulnerable situations in these apartments, so we must visit to make sure they were okay. This is a picture of Skouda. It's a little village in Greece, where I was born, actually, and have insisted that my kids go back to every summer, and my wife, who's American. I used to tell her I was lucky, but then one of my friends was there for the summer who said, wait, you come here every summer, you stay with his mother, and you don't even speak Greek, and you stay in this village? And since you're a saint. Now we're considering Thailand for the summer. But why this village, and why would I put that there? Because what's amazing in these villages, and there's a lot of downsides to it as well, but everybody in the village belongs. Everybody in the village belongs. There are people that live across the street from my mother's house, a guy who's, I'm sure, if we were clinically looking at, he's probably bipolar, big ouzo drinker. And, he works the fields and he rents at night. No one thinks twice about it. This is Zacharia, and it's okay. And he's part, and he goes to Cabanillo. He belongs. Everybody belongs. There is no sense of discontinuity. There's no us and them. And I think what we've lost in urbanization, and certainly even using these labels like homeless, as if it's a different type of person rather than a condition. It's not a trait of a person, it's the situation they're in. Mental illness. The labeling creates distance and has, I think, in some way separates us from what the solution is. And I think some of the Christian values that Bishop talks about, I think that's the intersection of where is the right intervention. The right intervention is we treat homeless people like we would treat our brothers and our sisters. And then the solutions become much more obvious and much less complicated. I can tell you that the program works very well. Housing is a basic right. You don't have to earn it. It's something that's given. There's been randomized controlled trials that show that this program, 80% successful compared to the treatment as usual, 40%. 80% when you use housing first and then treatment. It's not housing only, and 40% for treatment than housing. In the veterans case, they used housing first to 70,000 homeless veterans. There was a consensus both on the red and blue parties that these veterans had to be housed. They used housing first, bringing them into apartments with HUD vouchers, and the VA provided the social services. 60-plus cities have ended veterans homelessness in America. It's a 94% reduction in New York City. And we're on our way to actually ending it because there was a consensus there that veterans are worthy. Veterans deserve to be housed. It's spread, it's a program that has addressed the need in many different countries, and these are some of the places that are doing housing first now. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the point that really got me was the simplicity that you said at the end too, and bringing the picture of the village, was that really we should be treating one another as our brothers and sisters, and really the humans that we are, and why is it such a difficult concept? And also even when you said that the Housing First program really started here in New York City, which is incredible to think, because here we are, right, in Manhattan on the Upper East Side, and this is something that's very personal and very much in our lives and very much in the part of our days. So thank you for everything you shared as well. I'm also now going to introduce James Carras. Give me a second to pull out the biography. James is principal of Carras Community Investment Inc., a development finance consulting firm, and is a lecturer at Harvard University Kennedy School of Government. Mr. Carras is recognized nationally for the creation and expansion of over 50 development financial institutions and community investment initiatives. He currently serves as a brownfield finance advisor and housing finance advisor to CDFA, and previously served as a founding executive director of the National Association of Affordable Housing Lenders, the founding president of the Broward Housing Partnership, and the South Florida Community Land Trust. Prior to establishing his consulting business, he served as a community development advisor to the mayor of Boston and was the executive director of the Massachusetts Urban Reinvestment Advisory Group. Can we please welcome James to the podium?
Good evening. Good to see everybody, and it's good to be back in New York City. I'm a born and bred Bostonian, so and a lifelong Red Sox fan. So this is all right. Go Sox, right? But I stay away from the sports because we all have our own teams and our own favorites. But I do live in Florida now, and I spend a great deal in Boston, in my hometown, in teaching. And so I'm going to give you some perspectives this evening about the Housing First approach, which Dr. Sam talked about and presented, and how, and that begs the question, we need housing units. If you have, we say we need permanent housing, where are they? In New York City or Boston or in South Florida where I live? That begs the question, where are those units? You mentioned the issue of 60,000 units that are vacant in Los Angeles. That's not necessarily the case in other hot markets. I know in South Florida we have very few vacant units, whether they're luxury or affordable or workforce housing. So I wanted to talk about our housing policy, and Dr. Sam opened up with much of that, and focus on that in terms of creating housing, affordable housing, so people who are in the Housing First movement can move into those units. Your Grace, thank you for your comments and your remarks, and Dr. Sam for setting this up here. I want to think a little bit about the context of housing. How many have ever heard of the book or read the book Evicted by Matt Desmond? Won the Pulitzer Prize last year or the year before. He is a professor at Harvard who spent a year in Milwaukee living in a very low-income area and sharing the experience of our fellow human beings going through the process of eviction and losing their homes, and many of them becoming homeless and either moving to shelters or living on the streets. And I had an opportunity to meet Dr. Desmond, and I asked him, I said, well, what do you think the solution is to end poverty? And he simply said, provide housing for all. It's his way of saying housing first. Because housing is, yes, certainly it's spiritual, it's certainly a shelter, but it's an economic issue as well. And when we end poverty, we need to end homelessness, and we need to address the issue around providing shelter for all. Poverty is the main cause of homelessness. It's an economic issue shrouded with issues around race and the role of government. And as Dr. Sam indicated, years ago we had a very a federal government that said in terms of housing, let's create public housing. And part of the New Deal and right through the 40s and 50s, public housing. I grew up in the projects in Boston, next to the cathedral, Annunciation Cathedral, the Mission Hill Extension Annunciation Housing Project. My father died 3 months before I was born, and I was the youngest of 4 children. Without that housing, without that stability that provided her, a woman who was an immigrant, did not speak English, did not have a job, and had 4 young children under 12, I'm not sure where we would be. My brother is a Greek Orthodox priest in Toronto, and he said, when I said that to him, he said, yes, but it was our mother's faith that brought us through. And I said, I'll meet you halfway. And I believe it's our faith, absolutely, and her faith. But I also believe in the role of government in terms of providing housing. And certainly that was the case of my family and thousands, if not millions, of others through the history of this country. In fact, in 1949, we actually had a national housing policy. We haven't had one since then. In 1949, we said that every American deserves a decent home and a suitable living environment. And that has not taken place. We have not met that goal, and in fact, it's no closer than it was in 1949. And I would add also, as Dr. Sam indicated, in terms of the 80s, the Reagan administration, the Mental Health Systems Act of 1980 was landmark legislation that provided grants to community health centers to replace mental asylums. In 1981, President Reagan repealed most of that law, and also the closing of psychiatric hospitals and mental asylums. So that created another wave, another stream of folks who are now being put on the street. We have not addressed mental health as a public policy issue on the national level either. There has been some progress. The number of veterans experiencing homelessness declined by 2% between 2018 and 19. The number of veterans experiencing homelessness have been cut in half since 2009. And the number of people experiencing homelessness and families with children declined by 5% between 2018 and 19. That good news is shadowed by the fact that homelessness has increased for the 3rd consecutive year following 6 straight years of declines. Because we have an affordability crisis, not only in New York and Boston and Los Angeles and South Florida, but across the country, affordability is a key issue and a challenge. This morning I was on a webinar for those officials in Texas in dealing with issues around affordability. And Texas is not, many Northerners have, and others from California have moved to Texas seeking more affordable housing, but they're in an affordability crisis as well. The number of people experiencing homelessness on a single night increased by nearly 3% between 2018 and 19, driven by a 9% increase in the number of individuals staying in unsheltered locations. The number of individuals experiencing homelessness grew between 2018 and 19. The number of unsheltered individuals increased by 10%. I have limited time, so I hope that these PowerPoints will be shared with, or we put them in a place that everybody can take a look at them at a much deeper level. I saw you race through some slides, Dr. Sam, that look really, really important to review. So Housing First, as was it has taken that notion of putting people in shelters or transitional housing if they behave well. And again, I echo what Dr. Sam mentioned. We've turned that upside down, recognizing that when people are homeless, they couldn't attend to their mental health or substance use needs. Housing First is enormously successful. But we continue to hear myths around homelessness. We hear people say things like, you can't just house people who have addiction problems. The response is, you can and you must, because you can't treat addiction and you can't treat mental health issues without a stable home. Right? It is absolutely critical. And that goes to mental health and substance use abuse as well. These are risk factors, but as was previously indicated, most people who have mental health issues, most people who have addiction problems are housed, right? And it provides them with that security in terms of beginning to deal with their issues. What's it going to take to end homelessness? And the critical response to that is one word, is investment. It's going to take money. And I say this with my heart and with a great deal of sincerity, and I was touched in speaking to so many of you at the beginning, representing the nonprofit and social service agencies and our efforts by our Apostolos and other charitable organizations. We're putting our fingers in the dike. We're helping that stream doesn't become powerful. But to end homelessness, it's going to be an economic issue. It's going to be a public policy issue. And that economic issue is investment. Now, where does money come from? So it comes from the public sector and it comes from the private sector. Simple economics. Is the private sector going to build enough affordable housing for people that earn less than $15,000, $20,000 a year and some virtually no incomes? That's a fantasy. It's not going to happen. Not in this country. Not based on our system. It's not a criticism of the private sector. It's a reality. So therefore, we have to look at government. It's the only place we will see that type of investment that will take place. The Veterans Administration provides an excellent model, as was previously indicated, and we can solve chronic homelessness for veterans. We can expand that model in terms of creating permanent housing for others as well. We need to focus on increasing the supply of extremely low-income housing, right? And what I've seen and experienced around the country is that our public officials on a local level are embracing affordable, and now use the term workforce housing. And our workforce needs housing, absolutely, absolutely. But what we do is we focus on a constituency, a political constituency, that is in need for housing at the expense of extremely low income. And often because we don't want to, one, the extremely low income, very poor people, people living in poverty or homeless, don't vote. They're not a political constituency. They're not a political force in this country. So elected officials are going to pay attention to the workforce. Teachers' aides, nurses, police officers, fire officials, and others who need housing. Again, this is not a criticism of that approach, but we will only approach on the workforce because it's easier to do and it's more responsive politically. We wind up excluding extremely low income. The issues of affordability, housing affordability, and living wages and homelessness have been ignored on the federal level. It has been hard to see the disconnect in people's mind between housing and homelessness. I work as a consultant with government agencies around the country, and we have a Department of Housing, and then we have another office someplace else dealing with homelessness. And that homelessness department works with the social service organizations and some special funding that comes from Washington called the McKinney funds. But the coordination often, the coordination between those who are producing housing and those that are addressing homelessness, two different silos. We have a strong silo effect on between housing and homelessness. So let me leave you with some recipe, if you will, what we need to do. Clearly there needs to be an increased public role from the federal government. It is what we've seen, and this is not a political statement, it's a policy statement. The president announced his budget, his proposed budget for next year. He talked about an elimination of $6 billion from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And let me repeat that. $6 billion from the Department of Housing and Urban Development when we have this crisis taking place, right? And I apologize if you find that be a political statement. It's a policy statement. It's where our priorities are. I'm confident that Congress will not go along with that, but at the same time, what we need is an increased investment, not a status quo investment. We need a national housing policy that reiterates that a decent and safe home for all from 1949 is reinforced. We need to recognize that poverty, income inequality, and racial isolation are issues of social justice and economic importance. If we address those issues of poverty, homelessness, income inequality, racial isolation, I believe, and in fact economically believe, that our country becomes a lot stronger. It's a lot stronger when we address those issues. So it's not only a matter of the right thing to do, it's a matter of also of economic self-interest. In order to do these things, we need leadership, we need innovational technology, both in terms of construction methods and other uses of technology.
Grace, Reverend Fathers, ladies and gentlemen, and all you Philoptochos members out there in the audience, good evening, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you of the Greek Orthodox Ladies Philoptochos Society to assist our brothers and sisters challenged by homelessness and food insecurity in New York City, throughout the United States, and across the world. Philoptochos has a long tradition, nearly 9 decades of service to people in times of need, with empathy and love, and at all times acting in a way that reaffirms personal dignity. For those who have found themselves vulnerable to homelessness, the Society has contributed to housing costs, to prevent evictions and foreclosures. We've offered financial assistance to keep homes lit and heated, and we provided emergency grants to people whose homes have been hit by natural disasters like floods and hurricanes and fires. Recognizing that no one should have to choose between medical care and the security of a home, the Society assists with uncovered medical costs and supports philoxenia houses throughout the country, offering housing to families, temporary housing, to families who travel for medical treatment. Philoptochos also supports homeless veterans, we've heard a little bit about that, through programs like Operation Homecoming, providing them with house supplies and assisting them to transition to permanent housing. We help victims of domestic violence, the leading cause for women, with and without children, to become homeless, and to families affected by divorce and or abandonment of the breadwinner. And of course, we offer our love and our assistance to the elderly, the disabled, and those who have applied for public assistance as they await initiation of benefits. These essential grants, financial grants, have had a direct impact on the lives of so many people in need. Probably, if we were asked to, we would be hard-pressed to actually estimate the number of people assisted by more than 400 chapters across the country. But we keep them. We try our best to keep them in homes that they might otherwise have lost. Our thanks go to our National Philoptochos social worker, Paulette Yannikopoulos, and to so many dedicated stewards who counsel, evaluate, comfort, and work with our clients to achieve better lives and better living conditions. It was a random and completely unexpected experience that brought many Philoptochos stewards to a more personal and direct contact with the hungry and homeless. Soon after I was appointed national president, I was on the bus coming home, and I was seated in one of these plush kind of, buses, and I was trying desperately, but very unsuccessfully, not to listen to the conversation of the people who were seated beside me. Their very loud chatter focused on their recent sightings of what they considered to be more and more homeless and hungry people on the streets of New York City. They were less than sympathetic to their plight of their fellow New Yorkers, and they assigned a variety of reasons to the problem. The mayor was at fault, the president was to blame, the homeless were lazy, mentally disturbed, and just wanted to take it easy. Most disturbing of all was their absolute conviction that they wanted nothing to do with helping these people. That conversation launched a journey that led to the national Philoptochos Feed the Hungry campaign, which to date has provided meals to hungry and homeless people across the United States and across the world, and which resulted in Philoptochos being honored as a hunger hero by Feeding Children Everywhere, an international organization that fights hunger throughout the world. As I hope you will all agree, Philoptochos has a long and well-deserved history of charity. But looking at this problem, the problem of food insecurity and homelessness, caused us to think more about a more hands-on kind of philanthropy, the actual hand-to-hand offering of assistance to people, what my friends now refer to as get your nails dirty philanthropy. Tragically, we learned, and I know I'm suspicious of all the numbers that I've come across, but tragically we've learned that approximately 40 million Americans struggle with food insecurity, and even more heartbreaking, that 1 in 6 children in this country, the richest country in the world, 1 in 6 children do not know where their next meal will come from. With those very sobering statistics in mind, we challenge chapters across the Archdiocese to provide meals, not to just pay for them, but to actually provide meals to homeless and hungry people in their communities. Philoptochos chapters, as we know that they always do, responded with unexpected passion and enthusiasm. One single chapter, in fact, provided 65,000 meals alone. And to date, I am very happy to tell you that we have provided more than 3 million meals to homeless and hungry people across the United States. Here in New York City, the National Philoptochos sponsors a monthly soup run just outside and sometimes inside Penn Station, a ministry that has resonated with each of us deeply and profoundly, touching our souls and our hearts and reaffirming not just our love for our brothers and sisters, but most significantly our faith. As in all life experiences, these encounters offer lessons that might help you decide to join in the fight against the hunger and homelessness. Some lessons learned. The hungry and the homeless are just like us. Early on, while preparing for our first soup run, we visited a long-established weekly soup kitchen, in fact, right next door at Jan Hus. The experience was an eye-opener. The guests were distinguished, orderly, they were dignified, they were appreciative. They were young and they were old. And on that very first visit, we saw a little girl, a 4-year-old, who celebrated her birthday with all of the guests surrounding her and with candles ablaze, the whole thing. That night, we learned that homelessness and hunger can happen to anyone. Some are brought to that state by life-threatening illnesses, the loss of work, by the quirk of fate, and some are poor. Homelessness and hunger are conditions, we heard that before, they are conditions that people find themselves in. It is not who they are. It is what they are experiencing. Homeless and hungry people have valuable stories to share with us. At our outings, we offer clothing and meals and personal care products to about 100 people, a little more than 100 people on a Thursday night. And some have shared wonderful stories with us. Many will ask if they can give anything back for the hot meal that we're offering to them. And some are more willing to give it to another friend that they think is more needy than they are. And some tell us about jobs that they've lost and careers that are now in the past. One beautiful young man was particularly impressive and left a memory that I think is indelible. He thanked us for looking directly into his eyes. And I looked at him and I didn't quite get it, and he explained that most people will not look at homeless people. They treat them as if they are invisible. I don't think any of us after that night could ever do that again in our lives. Don't feel badly if you can't feed one. The problem of homelessness and hunger may look insurmountable or unsolvable, but don't allow the absence of a complete solution to rob you of the joy of helping even one person. Be comforted by the fact that you have helped make one night easier for one person. We can make a difference, one person at a time. Treat your guests as guests. We refer to the people we serve as our guests. This reminds us to treat them with the same dignity and respect that you would guests in your own home. Try to engage the guests in conversation. They are in desperate need of personal contact. And if possible, if you feel you can, reach out physically, shake their hands, and give them a hug. Don't think about what your yaya would say. Just do it. I can assure you that you will get more out of the hug than they get. Welcome the presence of our priests. I see lots of priests here tonight. I think that we can all agree that people living on the streets of New York and other cities like this, they have to have strength and resilience. But what we learned that was a little bit surprising was that they are also people of faith. Our guests often refer to their faith and sincerely thank Philoptochos women, but their connection to our clergy is immediate and palpable. While many of the guests have seen and experienced the darker side of life, they still have a strong core of spirituality. They are people of faith, and they are hungry for the comfort, guidance, and support of a priest. Be prepared for problems, but welcome the joy. I read an article once that said that approximately 40% of the people on the streets suffer from some degree of mental illness. We cannot assure you that you will not experience or encounter problems, but thankfully we've been lucky and we haven't had too many serious issues. And very often the other guests come to calm and quiet anyone who's concerned or who's raising a ruckus. Here's a secret. It doesn't take a lot of money to do what we do. You might think that programs like these are expensive and that hunger is a dilemma that can only be solved, although I understand globally it can only be solved, but on our level it can be solved only with love and kindness. We in Philoptochos have found that if asked, people are almost always extraordinarily generous. We received hundreds and hundreds of clothing items from a retailer who is a local parishioner. We've partnered with restaurateurs who always have food left over that would otherwise have gone to waste. Dentists have provided mounds of toothpaste and toothbrushes, and Bombas, a sock manufacturer with a heart, has donated countless pairs of socks, a very much needed commodity. And always, always, our stewards and their families have offered more than just their hearts to this cause. Our community knows about hospitality. We know how to set a table. It's a transferable skill that has benefited this cause immeasurably. People have even underwritten soup runs in memory of beloved family members. All of these efforts have been coordinated by the National Philoptochos Feed the Hungry Chair, the supremely organized, kind-hearted, big-hearted, and tireless Georgia Vlitas. Please contact Georgia at our national office for her guidance and inspiration. The bottom line is this. Given an opportunity, people are eager to be generous and helpful. Teach your children well. We should use these opportunities, soup runs, stocking soup kitchens, as educational tools to introduce our youth to the needy around them and to the tradition of a lifetime of service. From young children, we learned that we shouldn't use plastic bags. And soon a parish out in New Jersey had their Hope group, the little ones, Hope, right? Had their Hope group collect sustainable bags to donate to our services. Early on, a 10-year-old came to me and he told me that he was in charge of giving out clothes to people on a midnight run. So I wondered how the youngster handled this kind of stuff, How did he deal with them? And so very sensitively, I asked him how he did it. What did he say? How did he feel? And the child looked at me rather curiously and simply said, I just asked them what their size is. So here's the lesson. Follow the model of the children and just do it. What comes around, this is where I end up, what goes around comes around. In a recent segment on a news program, a world-renowned cardiologist suggested that the selfless service to someone outside of your family, outside of your community, someone that you don't know, may be the very best thing you can do for heart health. Your presence here tonight is evidence that you are already thinking about service to your brothers and sisters. I truly believe that feeding the homeless and the hungry will not only provide nourishment to those we serve, the physical act of giving feeds our souls and our spirits as well. Hunger and homelessness are a pervasive challenge in this city and all over the world. The problem's been around for generations, but the time for compassion alone has passed, and we need to match our good intentions with hard work. We may never know or see the results of our work, but we can be certain that doing nothing will produce nothing. We can be agents for change, and I urge you to consider joining or starting or helping, whatever, with a hunger program and a homeless program. It may look like a sacrifice today, but I promise you it'll be the best thing you ever do for yourself. Thank you very much.